Do you look good in suede? I've never had a piece of suede clothing in my life, at least that I can remember. But if I did, I hope I could pull it off like a star in GQ magazine. Now keep that idea of suede off to the side for now. It's going to come up soon. Let's just jump right into the story. You never know what you're going to get when you're a store detective. It was April 2, 1945, and George Riker was patrolling as the store detective at Alexander's department store on 3rd Avenue in the Bronx. Alexander's catered to the well-to-do middle class, and they sold discounted designer clothing and high-quality private labels. Their merchandise buyers were experts in acquiring the latest fashions at discount prices, and then they would pass those savings on to their customers. It was a very popular and well-loved store. Their advertising slogan was, "You'll find Alexander's has what you're looking for. How lucky can you get?" Now, George Riker was doing his job that day. He was watching the customers that were coming into the store when he observed 2 teenage boys enter. One of them, the subject of today's video, was 16 years old and his name was David. David was hard to miss. He was tall and lanky, neat in appearance, pleasant in manner. However, he had a dark side too. He picked on smaller boys. Once he struck a girl at school, and he also assaulted an usher in a theater. David was also a thief, and he was called an overgrown child. David went to a rack holding a suede sports vest, which he sneakily placed under his coat. He left the store without paying for the vest, and when he was followed by the store detective, George Riker, David threw the suede vest away and he bolted. There was a 5-block chase, and George actually ended up catching David. The value of the suede sports vest was $6.29, not a penny more. When David was detained, he had 93 cents in his pocket. David's explanation for the theft is kind of humorous. He admitted the charge, but said that he was only in the department store at the suggestion of his buddy, who he only knew by his nickname of Pee-wee. He said that he and Pee-wee were intending to purchase something, and he denied that he had any intention of stealing anything. But when he saw that vest, he was tempted. I guess David admired the idea of a sharp-dressed man, as the lyrics go in that 1983 song from ZZ Top. Now, David already had quite a few run-ins with the law up to this point, so he was sentenced to an upstate reformatory for 3 years. Now, I'm going to skip over the entire part of him being imprisoned, and I'm going to go straight to when he was actually released on parole, which is on November 4, 1946. Now, there are rules when you go on parole, as you can imagine. One of them being you can't associate with known criminals. But David ignored that. And now we're going to get to the part of the story where we hear about the Panthers and the Jolly Sportsmen. The Panthers were a fighting gang from the Bronx, and the Jolly Sportsmen, they were a different breed altogether. They were actually a social club. They were not a gang. It was the spring of 1947, May 20 to be exact. David was out hanging out with his pals, 14 other boys, all of them members of the Panthers. And it was 10:30 p.m., and they, with 5 boys from the Jolly Sportsmen, were on the corner of 168th Street and Boston Road. According to the police, the Jolly Sportsmen were well behaved and they got into very little trouble. On the other hand, the Panthers were one of the 2 groups in that neighborhood who continually gave trouble to the police. As the 14 members of the Panthers were talking to the 5 members of the Jolly Sportsmen were wearing these heavy woolen sweaters with the initials JS on the front. The Panthers liked these sweaters, and they forced the Jolly Sportsmen to remove the sweaters and give them to them. At the same time, one of the Jolly Sportsmen was forced to remove his wristwatch, valued at $85, and give it to David. That's quite a value for a watch for a teenager in 1947. And for good measure, the Jolly Sportsman was hit on the head with a rock after his watch was stolen. But it wasn't clear who threw the rock. The Jolly Sportsman complained about this to the police, so they went after David for the robbery of the wristwatch and the sweater as well, which was valued at $11. 2 days later, on May 22, 1947, at 5 p.m., Detective Barry of the 11th Division, who was very familiar with the Panthers and their criminal ways, saw a large group of them standing again at the same corner of 168th Street and Boston Road. David and 2 other Panthers were wearing the sweaters, which formerly belonged to the Jolly Sportsmen. This was a dead giveaway, and Detective Barry promptly arrested them. However, prior to this arrest, the wristwatch had actually been returned back to the Jolly Sportsman who it was taken from. Apparently, David had a change of heart. He knew that he was going to get into a lot of trouble, and he still owed time on parole, so he returned the watch. The story gets a little bit murky here, and David actually comes out looking a little better than at the beginning of the story. David was interviewed in city prison in the Bronx about what happened. He told a story different than what Detective Barry said happened. David claimed that on May 20 he was with members of the Panthers, but they borrowed, not took, several sweaters from the Jolly Sportsmen. He said he saw one of the other Panthers obtain a sweater and another one take the wristwatch. David felt that stealing the wristwatch was a bridge too far, so he made the other Panther give it to him so he could return it. He tried to find the Jolly Sportsman who it belonged to, but he couldn't, so he gave it to his cousin, and his cousin returned it back to the rightful owner. Now, as for him wearing a Jolly Sportsman sweater, he said no force or duress was used to get it. As a matter of fact, David said, he was riding his bicycle that evening. It was getting cold, and so he borrowed the sweater. I guess that would mean the Jolly Sportsman would be cold instead. Anyhow, David claimed he intended to return the sweater within a day or so. The police were skeptical about all this, and they didn't trust that David was telling truth, that no force was used. Part of the problem with all this was that David was hanging out with the Panthers, which, as mentioned before, were a well-known troublesome gang. The 2 Panthers who were wearing the jackets with David had very serious police records. One of them performed 2 burglaries and 2 larcenies for good measure. The other was actually indicted on a homicide charge in May 1946, but his case was dismissed. These were the guys that David was hanging out with, which was a direct violation of parole, so he was sent back to prison and he served the rest of his time there. Now, I don't know a lot about the Panthers from the Bronx, but these are not to be confused with the Black Panthers. Now, it sounds like this gang had caused a lot of trouble with the police, and when you throw a homicide into the mix, it sounds like there's a lot more to this gang that needs to be found out. Okay, let's go back to the Suede. If David didn't steal the Suede Sports Vest, valued at $6.29, he probably would have gotten off on probation or maybe a warning for the sweater and the wristwatch debacle. So in short, Suede was David's kryptonite. And so I throw it back to you. What's your kryptonite? I would love to hear it. Comment below. Thank you very much for your support, and if you made it this far in the video, double thanks to you. I hope you have a great day, and I look forward to seeing you on the next video.